Focusing on the right muscle groups can make your physique improve much faster than if you focused on wrong ones. Hell, when I started lifting, I focused all on my legs and the results were unimpressive. At the end of the video, I'll give you the best muscles to focus on for a general good bodybuilding physique and for a good physique for the general population standards. I'll be ranking muscle groups on 2 criteria. First, my own biased opinion, and second, a bodybuilding perspective. What do judges in physique sports look for in an impressive physique? Unfortunately, this isn't something where we have a ton of evidence to rely upon. While there is some research on, for example, what physiques women tend to find the most attractive, there's not as much as you'd think. On average, as far as a man's attractiveness to women, being a bit higher in body fat tends to be a bit worse for attractiveness. Likewise, having some muscle is better than having no muscle. However, when it comes to muscularity, there seems to be a bit of an inverted U relationship, wherein having some muscle is seen as a good thing, and having too much muscle can actually become detrimental again. But ultimately, these are averages, and these things don't really tell us which muscles you should focus on for the most impressive physique. And in fact, I don't really think you should be thinking about traction when deciding how to train in the gym. I think looks maxing is pretty cringe. As they always say, your most important muscle is your personality, am I right? And since pretty much all my viewers are male, in fact I think I have 4% of my viewers are female, we'll be focusing mostly on male physique standards here. Let's start with the front delts. The front delts aren't the most important muscle for a good physique. While they do contribute a little bit to the appearance of an X taper and a V taper for the upper body, they don't really contribute to that V taper quite as much as some other muscles. And in fact, because of how easy they are to develop, I wouldn't give this one too high of a tier. I'll put them in high B tier. Conversely, the rear delts are probably even less important. While yet again, from the rear, they contribute somewhat to the appearance of a V taper, they're not particularly visible from the front. So they can only go into around mid B tier. But what about the side delts? Well, the side delts are visible from both the front and the rear. And if you have a relatively tight-fitting t-shirt, such as this t-shirt right here, courtesy of Rascal Apparel, then they can actually make a physique look quite a bit bigger, both from the front and from the rear. So, side delts go into low S tier. Before we move on to the arms, let's briefly touch on the legs. As it turns out, for most men, the legs don't rank that highly. There are certain muscles that are exceptions though. I think the single most important leg muscle to look jacked overall that you should focus on is the quadriceps. The quadriceps are visible from the front. Having an impressive set of quadriceps impresses nearly anyone, and in contrast to having an impressive set of hamstrings or glutes, for a lot of people, quadriceps are also pretty hard to build, and quadricep training usually involves a lot of grueling effort. So, for those reasons, quadriceps go into high beta. The hamstrings are essentially the biceps of the legs. But unfortunately, in contrast to the quadriceps, if you're anywhere above around 12% or 15% body fat as a male, it becomes very difficult to have impressive looking hamstrings. Most men simply store too much body fat around their hamstrings to have them look really impressive. Additionally, unless you wear pretty short shorts, you're not going to be impressing anyone with the size of your hamstrings. Finally, since there's not as big of an element of sweep to your hamstrings as there is to your quads, I don't think they contribute as heavily to the appearance of an X taper physique. For those reasons, into low B tier the hamstrings go. What about the glutes? Well, as much as I hate to say it, the glutes aren't the main muscle that will make most people's physique look particularly impressive. It's not the first thing that contributes to an impressive X taper, and most of the time, unless you store a lot of body fat there in clothing, your glutes won't look all that impressive. For those reasons, compared to the quads and to the hamstrings, I'll have to put the glutes in high C tier for men. Let's round off the legs with the calves and the tibialis anterior. Turns out no one really cares about your calves, and there's a reason why it's a whole meme about not training calves and skipping calf day. No one really looks at a physique and determines overall aesthetics by calves. Look at many top successful bodybuilders. Few of them actually have particularly impressive calf development. And in fact, you can have great calves without having a good overall physique. Just look at any dad calves out there. Finally, the calves are such a small muscle that they don't really contribute to the appearance of an X taper at all, basically. So, into low D tier the calves go. But there is one muscle that is even worse than the calves for looking jacked, and that's the tibialis anterior. Nearly no one trains this muscle, nor should they. As much as nearly no one cares about how big your calves are, even fewer people care about how big your tibialis anterior look. No one's ever been impressed by an impressive set of tibialis anteriors. So, for that reason, into low D tier the tibialis anterior goes. One often forgotten about lower body muscle is the adductors. And while the adductors aren't the centerpiece of the lower body, they are actually surprisingly important for giving your thigh a great taper. Alongside a good set of quads, having relatively well-developed adductors can help a lot with giving the illusion of a nice teardrop and taper to your quads. And with your quads and adductors being the main muscles on display for your lower body from the front, this is actually pretty important. Now don't get me wrong, doing plenty of deep leg pressing, hack squatting, split squats, etc. will give you a lot of good adductor development. However, there are three muscles in the adductors: the adductor magnus, the adductor brevis, and the adductor longus. Two of those muscles don't really get trained well during any compound movements. So if you want your best adductors, you'll have to isolate them. But into mid-B tier, the adductors go. Next, we have the arms. Whether you've been lifting for a long time, you just got into lifting, or you don't even lift yet, the arms are something nearly everyone pays attention to when it comes to evaluating someone's physique. In fact, when I first started lifting, I basically did no isolation work for my arms for about 2 to 3 years. Instead, I spent all my time training legs. And for about 3 to 4 years of my lifting journey at the start, no one could actually even really tell that I lifted, until I wore shorts. Takeaway from the story? Train your arms. It's how nearly anyone will evaluate how impressive your physique is. Just have a look around YouTube fitness. Nearly everyone is obsessed with getting bigger arms and bigger shoulders, but no one is really talking about how to grow your legs. From the success of Arnold all the way to today, people have been caring about arm size for a long time. And it's not about to change, whether that's inside the gym, in a locker room, or just on the street. For those reasons, both biceps and triceps go into S tier, high S tier. The triceps take the cake for one reason. They make up a bit more of the size of your overall arm, so if you have big triceps, that will take your arm size up by a bit more than if you just had impressive biceps instead. One super underrated muscle for having your physique look more impressive is actually the forearms. I've seen many people with decent arm development, 16, 17, 18-inch arms, but if they don't train their forearms, their posing can often come off a little bit lackluster. Having big forearms, and especially forearm flexors, can really help with this. And in fact, when I look at most people's arm training, if there's one thing that's missing, it's usually adding in at least some forearm isolation work, if you have the time for it. It's not the number one priority for that many people, but if you have the time for it, adding in some forearm work and growing them can really make for a big effect on your overall physique. In fact, I'll go even further. While you can see your biceps and triceps wearing short-sleeve t-shirts or tank tops, which you'll wear at least on occasion, when it comes to your forearms, they're almost always on display. So, alongside rounding out a good set of arms overall, and also being on display even more frequently than your arms, I think the forearms are a mid-S tier muscle group that doesn't get enough attention. Let's move on to the chest. Most people love to focus on training the lower chest, doing a ton of flat barbell bench pressing, maybe even some machine flies, and other exercises, predominantly targeting their lower chest. And the lower chest does definitely help with building an impressive physique. I mean shit, just look at Dr. Pack. He has an impressive lower chest, and his physique is great. And he's not just standing behind the camera right now, promise. But ultimately, your lower chest doesn't contribute quite as much to overall V-taper as your upper chest. For that reason, lower chest goes into mid-A tier, whereas upper chest goes into low S tier. Your upper chest is essentially your chest around your clavicle area. And as you might infer, this will contribute heavily to your overall V-taper and X-taper. Alongside getting bigger side delts, getting a bigger upper chest can really give the appearance of having broader shoulders and having an overall greater shoulder to waist ratio. For that reason, the upper chest goes into low S tier right below the side delts. After all, you can see the side delts in both front and rear poses, whereas the upper chest, you can only really see from the front, unless your chest happens to look like Dr. Pack's, aka Dr. Peck's. Let's move on to the back. The lats get a lot of focus and love within the YouTube fitness community, and for good reason. Because of the lat shape, they actually contribute more heavily to the appearance of a V-taper from both the front and the rear compared to the upper back, such as the middle traps, lower traps, rhomboids, etc. With the way the lats are shaped, they can actually make your waist look smaller if they get big enough, and overall simply help a ton with developing broader looking shoulders. For that reason, lats go into low S tier. If you have big lats, big side delts, and a big upper chest, in all likelihood, your V-taper is looking pretty good already. What about the upper back? Well, while you have some people who have wide lats but lack a little bit of thickness to their back, this is a bit less important than lat development in my opinion. Especially in a t-shirt, you'll almost never really see someone having a lagging upper back that is really killing their physique. That said, having an impressive upper back can really round out a physique as well. While it doesn't contribute to the appearance of a V-taper quite as much, it can be quite helpful in complementing an overall good physique. So for that reason, it goes into high A tier. Let's talk about the neck. For a few years on YouTube Fitness, the neck was getting a lot of love. From Alpha Destiny to looking up old clips of Mike Tyson training, people were focusing on neck training for what seemed like around 5 years. However, more recently, the hype has died down. I'm also sure you've all seen Jeff Nippert's video on neck training, and why neck training can actually make your physique look a lot more aesthetic, and even your face look more handsome, apparently. Once again, I think it kind of comes down to an inverted U relationship with neck size. If you are in fact the infamous pencil neck, yeah, maybe you do need to train your neck to get up to maximum aesthetic standards, but I do think you can take it too far. Sure, you can argue that taking your neck from a pencil neck of 12 inches to maybe say 15 inches will make an appreciable difference to your physique, but going from say a 15-inch neck to say a 20 or a 22-inch neck, will that make you look more aesthetic? Will that make you look more handsome? I don't know. I personally don't look at pictures of Mike Tyson with a 22-inch neck and think, wow, that extra 2 inches of neck girth really made him look more aesthetic. But hey, you do you. At any rate, I think neck goes into mid-beta. What about the upper traps? Well, I think in line with the neck, it's not a muscle most people pay attention to too much. However, just like the neck, the upper traps are pretty visible with everyday clothing, so they do make somewhat of a difference to your overall physique. However, they don't really meaningfully contribute to a great X-taper, V-taper, whatever you want to call it, and they're on display even less than your neck. At least with your neck, you can see it in everyday life. With upper traps, usually not so much. And in fact, getting really developed upper traps can almost make your shoulders look a bit smaller sometimes, which, speaking from experience, not a great look. So upper traps go into low beta. Finally, let's talk about the core. First, let's talk about the obliques. Not many people do a ton of direct training for their obliques. However, since the obliques do contribute to spinal flexion, if you're doing any ab training, you will get some indirect oblique training in as well. While the argument has been made that developing great obliques will actually take away from your physique overall because your waist gets bigger, I don't think this is a real concern. For one, direct training for your obliques, such as dumbbell side bends, can actually double as erector training, which we'll get to in a second. And erector training is probably a good thing for overall back development. For another, that same reasoning should also apply to growing your abs. I don't really see many people bandying around the idea that ab training will make your waist blocky and therefore kill your aesthetics, so I don't think the same should be said when it comes to direct oblique training. The reality is that even with oblique training, your obliques aren't going to blow up to the point of killing your aesthetics, by any means. And in fact, having developed obliques that are relatively lean can look great on a physique. It's just that you won't be able to show them off quite as much, and they're not as important to most people as abs. For those reasons, into low beta obliques go. Well, what about the abs? Well, for almost anyone who got into lifting for semi-aesthetic reasons, because they wanted to improve how they looked, ab definition and overall appearance in a six-pack are often tied to that concept. What people don't know is that training the abs directly can actually make a pretty appreciable difference to how they look even at higher body fat percentages. For some people, say the people who are around 15% body fat as men or around 20-25% body fat as women, just training your abs directly will allow you to take your abs from barely visible to oftentimes quite visible to the point of being impressive. So direct ab training and growing your abs in general can actually be quite underrated. For that reason, into low ATA the abs go. I mentioned side bends could be a decent way of training the erectors, but should you train the erectors in general? It's certainly not a top priority, let's put it that way. Like the upper back muscles, like the lower traps, the mid traps, and the rhomboids, the erectors do actually contribute to the appearance of a thicker back. But, just like for the upper back, the appearance of a thicker back doesn't get seen during everyday life, in contrast to something like the lats. Additionally, no one has ever asked you about how big your erectors are. So, for those reasons, erectors go into low CTA. Before I tell you how to bring up certain muscles, let me tell you what I think are the most important muscles to focus on for a generally impressive physique for, say, the general population, and then specifically what muscles to focus on if you're simply trying to get a better overall physique as, say, a physique athlete. For men in the general population who just want to get jacked, I think the 5 muscles to focus on are the upper chest, the side delts, the lats, the biceps, and the triceps. Ultimately, your arms and overall how broad your shoulders are is what is most important for the general population as a man. For bodybuilding, on the other hand, developing at least some semblance of leg muscle is more important to most people. So we'll select the quads, the lats, the upper chest, and the side delts. While big arms are still rewarded in bodybuilding, they are not as much of a centerpiece as they are in, say, the general population. For example, while Lee Priest had great arms, he didn't necessarily crush everyone in bodybuilding. The appearance of an X-taper is much more prized in bodybuilding compared to, say, the general population. Now that you know which muscles you might want to focus on, here's how to specialize on a given muscle. First, train it with a bit more volume. If you're currently doing 10 to 20 sets per week for that muscle, take it up to 20 to maybe even 30 sets per week for that muscle. On average, train it a bit closer to failure. If you usually go to 2 reps from failure, maybe train that muscle a bit closer to failure. Alongside training that muscle harder and with more sets, consider spreading out those sets over the week a bit more. If you usually use a push-pull legs routine, training each muscle twice a week, if you're really trying to bring up your biceps, for example, consider training them 4 times a week. As you add more and more sets into a single workout for a single muscle, those latter few sets may not add quite as much to your growth as if you simply took those last few sets and spread them out across the week a bit more. As far as exercise selection goes, you may want to incorporate a few more isolation exercises. With isolation exercises, because you're only targeting one muscle, you're removing other muscles that could potentially be limiting factors, ensuring that if you hit failure on that exercise, the target muscle is also hitting physiological failure. Likewise, to ensure good development of the muscle overall, pick at least 2 to 3 movements across the week for that muscle. Finally, specialization, or really focusing on a few muscles at once, is a double-edged sword. If you're going higher on volume, you're training closer to failure, you're training that muscle more often, both in terms of recovery and in terms of time, something else will have to give. Reduce volume for other muscle groups that you don't care as much, that may not be as important to you for developing your physique as much as possible. But really, if you want to develop your best overall physique, there's nothing that can replace MyoAdapt. MyoAdapt is a coach in your pocket. We've been working on it for years, and it's constantly being updated with the latest cutting-edge science. Just like a coach, MyoAdapt creates a routine individualized to you. It fits you, your schedule, your time availability, your equipment, and much more. We recently tried to calculate how many routines MyoAdapt could come up with, and it was basically incalculable. For excellent coaching at a fraction of the price of a human coach, go to myoadapt.com and sign up now to be notified when MyoAdapt finally launches. By signing up, you'll receive a free trial and a lifetime discount. Every muscle group ranked. Dr. Milo Wolf. Until next time.